Thank you, President Marion. It's my pleasure to introduce Jordan Williams, our speaker today. Jordan is the Executive Director of the New Zealand Taxpayers Union, New Zealand's largest taxpayer advocacy group with more than 36,000 subscribed members and supporters. Founded in 2013 by Kiwi blogs David Farrer and Jordan Williams, the Taxpayers Union vision is a prosperous New Zealand with efficient, transparent and accountable government. The union's mission is lower taxes, less waste, more transparency. The union is chaired by Barry Saunders. Jordan runs the day-to-day operations of the union. His background is as a constitutional and commercial lawyer. In 2011, he was spokesman for Vote for Change, a lobby group that campaigned against the retention of the MMP electoral system. He is a regular political commentator across News Talk ZB, Radio New Zealand and Magic Talk. Welcome, Jordan, and we're looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you very much, Colleen. So I'm going to cover do a very quick, although Colleen's largely covered it, a bit of an introduction to the Taxpayers Union and then get straight into the topic really of the year, which is the government's tax working group. But firstly, can I just acknowledge this is from my perspective, quite a diverse Rotary group in that there are both a number of major donors in the room, there's a number of comrades or members of the Taxpayers Union, but also a few former and current elected officials that we've previously sparred with as well. So thank you for having me. So David Farrer and I started the organisation back in 2013 because we identified that you open a newspaper and there's simply hundreds of groups every day asking for ever more public resources, taxpayer money, for every cause under the sun. You know, from the Society for the Protection of the Albino Snail to everything else. There's very much a one-sided argument in terms of spending taxpayers' money. So we come from the point of view that the government at the moment is about 41% of the economy. Surely we can find some efficiencies or some reprioritisation before we increase that burden. You know, how large do you want the government to be? The first step is obviously is every dollar going to its most valuable use. So the bedrock of our campaign is really about identifying government waste, and we do that using our our lobby group model rather than a traditional think tank. When David and I established the organisation, we initially wanted to start a think tank similar to what the New Zealand Initiative has turned into. But looking at our equivalents overseas and the state of, unfortunately, the New Zealand media, we come as we find it, not as we'd like it. And I have in our offices, in the foyer when donors come in, I show them two articles. One is a front page Herald piece we had, which was our largest ever expose of government waste. So the government wanted to save 20 million in a particular area of tax policy. It was to do with child support. Changed the law to save 20 million. The cost overrun for the software changes at IRD was 126 million. Now that got one front page. We gave the Herald the exclusive, no follow-up TV, no radio. Next to it, I've got Stephen Joyce's $1,500 taxi ride in Sydney. Well, we got TV, radio, all over the place. Now, we know one of those matters, and one actually doesn't in the grand scheme of things. But unfortunately, with the current state of the media and our objective to raise awareness of this radical idea that you spend your money rather than, dare I say it, Wellington. We chase the stories that are more likely to get the attention to that message. So we are the voice for taxpayers and ratepayers in the corridors of power. With our sister organisation, the Auckland Ratepayers Alliance, we enjoy As of today, I see we just clipped over 37,000 subscribed members and supporters. Our mission, the 6 words: lower taxes, less waste, more transparency. So to give you an example of these, of the sort of lobby group model, you might remember a few years ago the story about Rotorua Council spending $90,000 importing mud from South Korea to bring to Rotorua for their mud festival. And that was it was actually reported to us through our tip line by one of our members. And in the same way as Greenpeace, their staff get into polar bear costumes to make their message known, one of our interns got into our beloved Porky the Waste Hater pig costume, and I donned the tux, and we went and presented an enormous novelty Supreme Achievement Award for creativity and imagination and wasting ratepayers' money. And we blew that up to not only a national story, but in fact one of our young researchers, a 22-year-old chap, even got on the BBC as a result of that story. And particularly in local government, there's just no one else in that space really shining that disinfectant light on where the money's going. Rotorua Council responded. They had actually held an urgent meeting the next day, not to pull the pin on the spending, which they did about a week later, but to talk about possible legal action against the Taxpayers Union. Not because we got anything wrong, but because of the bad publicity they had as a result of us exposing this waste. So we'll come on to the more serious matter that is before us, and this is really why organisations like us exist, and it is to fight the big battles of which at the moment is around the tax working group and the capital gains tax. We'll take a step back first and to recall how we ended up in the position we are now. When Jacinda Ardern became leader of the Labour Party prior to the 2017 election, the policy the Labour Party had was to introduce a capital gains tax, albeit a much lower one, but the view inside the caucus was that that was a very, it was a vote loser. And to kick it to touch, what Ms Ardern said in her first few weeks as a leader is that they would create a tax working group, or a working group to evaluate the tax system. We've actually had a number of working groups over the last 20 years, and I'd argue that those were much less political and the results of far higher quality, but they subsequently appointed Dr. Michael Cullen, and there was a public consultation process, etc. What they've come out with is, without a doubt, you could use different metaphors, but it's definitely the most aggressive capital gains regime in the world. We can find nothing, you could be kind and say it is pure, because the only exception really is the family home, which is something I'll come back to. But even in terms of rates, it is right out there on the spectrum. And I guess our key objection, and we've looked at this from the point of view that we're not totally against new taxes. We're happy with the capital gains tax if you could objectively make the argument that it is fair. In fact, we published reports leading up to the tax working group's release. We had 5 criteria. This only matches one of them. But I come back to what are the key sort of things we're looking for in the tax system. And they were really given the objective of 2 things. Number 1 was around housing affordability, which is something I'll come back to. And the second is the main problem in our economy, at least in my lifetime, has been very low productivity. That is low capital investment, a reliance on cheap labour. And that is capital. And what a capital gains tax does is tax the very thing we need more of in our economy. In fact, we're looking at the other day, for our labour productivity rankings, we are now outranked by Lithuania, Slovakia and Turkey. And that is a result of low capital investment. And so, coming from that, the second is, again, challenges in my lifetime and for my generation, is around housing affordability. why on earth, if you want to fix that, would you tax every class of capital investment except your own house? So if you've got excess income and you want to put something aside, don't put it into savings or shares or a business. If you can squirrel it into your own house, the Australians would call this a McMansion, or sort of building it out, because everything you do is for your own property is tax-free under these proposals. So which assets do pay the tax? So it applies to small businesses, rental property, commercial property, shares, goodwill and intangible assets. In fact, the only major exemption is the family home, up to 4,500 square metres. So if you're in a leafy inner suburb and you're less than about half a hectare, you're okay. But if you're on a lifestyle block property, even if it's worth a small fraction of that, you're covered by the tax. New Zealanders that choose to have a boarder live with them, an Airbnb, or run a home business from a room within the family home are covered by the tax. It also applies to inflationary gains. So, hypothetical, you have a holiday home. I know there's a few in here I see that have places in Awaroa. It doesn't follow the market. It's simply the value changes with inflation. When you sell it, you will be taxed on that inflationary difference, even though there's no real increase. In fact, based on the working group's own modelling, over 2/3 of the revenue from the capital gains tax proposal in the first 10 years is simply due to inflationary gains. The proposed rate is extremely high. For most taxpayers, they'll pay 30 or 33 cents on their realised capital gains, and we compare that to the 15%, which was the rate proposed by Labor at the 2011 and 2014 elections. In comparison, the rate in Australia on assets held longer than a year is 22.5%, and it's only 20% in the US, although there's quite a lot of further deductions there. The maximum capital gains tax rate in the United Kingdom is 28% on residential property and 20% for other assets. We then come on to the double taxation aspect, and this is really something that hasn't had a lot of attention in the media, and that is for when you own a business, you're paying tax on your income. You're also paying tax on any assets you sell within the business, but then you're taxed again on that capital gain when you go to sell the equity. Now, that totally stuffs up our imputation regime in terms of avoiding double taxation for corporates, or for for shareholders rather. And the tax working group has simply parked that issue and said that it's identified as an issue, but not come up with any solutions at all. So what we are abandoning is actually what we consider, and we go to very nerdy taxpayer conferences around the world, a system that has very little loopholes, that is comparatively uncomplex, to adopting the most complex system of any tax system around the world. And we look at that from there's various measures or indexes around the world that look at how much it costs, both in terms of administration costs for the Crown, but also the administration costs for the taxpayer, how many cents per dollar raised. And New Zealand is one of the best in the world. It's in the top 5%. This is what we're giving up. And this is what the brouhaha has been over the last few days with Business New Zealand's estimation of the billions of dollars in administration costs a capital gains tax would be. Reasonable minds can differ on whether it is quote unquote fair, but there is an enormous cost which we need to acknowledge. That is the very nature of a capital gains tax, because when it is the very nature and uncertainty of having to value particularly equity investment. So where to from here? So the government has said that it is going to be responding to Dr. Cullen's tax working group's proposals by the end of April. Whereas we're hearing very different things from the various political actors. Obviously, we've got the Easter and Anzac Day very close together, so I think we can expect either the last 2 days of April or possibly as early as next week prior to Easter. From our point of view, we're throwing everything at it. This is our make or break. We've launched last week a campaign called Axe This Tax, axthistax.nz, this is the plug, to which so far about 3,500 New Zealanders have used the tool to email the Prime Minister asking her to axe the tax. In comparison, that's about the number of people that submitted to the tax working group, of which in the reply rounds about 70% were our members, in total last year to the tax working group. But this is an MMP environment, and what we hear is that there's quite a lot of complacency, particularly in business circles, around whether the capital gains tax will happen. I think the new political environment, given the tragic events of the last few weeks, we have a Prime Minister at the absolute peak of her political power. If they choose to spend it on this, New Zealand could well have on the law books by the end of next year this aggressive capital gains tax regime. And I guess it comes down to, do you trust Winston Peters to save New Zealand from something, or could he sell out for perhaps another $1 billion for his provincial growth fund, or a guaranteed seat? So in conclusion, in case you haven't picked up, we don't like the capital gains tax, nor do we like government waste, and I do want to leave plenty of time for questions, but our power is only from our numbers. I see that there was a group this morning at Parliament that launched. It appears to be at least partially taxpayer funded. It's a bunch of big groups. So far they've had about 200 people sign a petition. That's what they call grassroots. You know, our power doesn't come from that. Our power comes from our numbers. So I'd encourage you, if you share our view of lower taxes, less waste, more transparency, I'd ask you to go to our website or give Joe Ascroft, who's one of our economic staff, your business card, and we'll send you a weekly missive about what's really going on with your money, or support the campaign via our website. So with that, I'm happy to take... I'm going to cheat slightly. Joe's one of our full-time economists, and he's come along to art in case I get any really curly questions, because I'm conscious that there's a few experts in the room. I don't want to be caught out. Thank you very much.
Jordan, thanks very much for joining us today. I guess capital gains tax is of a particular interest to us all, not just for ourselves, but for our children and our grandchildren too. So we thank you for your analysis of that and for answering those questions. We all await the outcome of the government's deliberations. But I think the one lesson we can take from your talk is that you've really explained what an effective lobby group does. Now, many of us belong to lobby groups, but it's good to hear from you how your lobby group works, and we know that you have been successful in a number of things. So thank you very much for your talk, and I forgot to bring you the little envelope, but I'll give it to you.